What did you say?
I said what you said.
We all remember the theme songs, the catchphrases, and the wild storylines. The promos always pushed the cute kids, the wacky neighbors, or the cool older cousin with the perfect hair. But if you go back and really watch these shows, you start to notice something. It's the parents who are doing most of the heavy lifting. They're the ones anchoring the emotional moments, selling the craziest plots, and turning simple lesson of the week material into scenes people still quote decades later. Half the time, the kids are bouncing off the walls, but it's mom and dad who make the world feel real, lived in, and somehow like home. Tonight, we're counting down 10 TV parents who secretly carried the whole show. These are the moms and dads who were supposed to be supporting characters, but ended up holding together the tone, the heart, and often the ratings. Without them, a lot of these series would just be noisy kids and random punchlines. We'll hit everything from earnest 80s family sitcoms to sharp 90s classics, and even a few chaotic households from the 2000s. And along the way, we'll see just how much these parents shaped what we now call comfort TV. If you love nostalgic deep dives like this, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more trips back to primetime. Now, let's start our list with a pair of former hippies who tried to keep their cool while their kids went full Reagan era. 10. Stephen and Elise Keaton, Family Ties. On paper, Family Ties is all about Alex P. Keaton, the young conservative in a house full of ex-hippie parents. Michael J. Fox became the undisputed breakout star. But that dynamic only works because Stephen and Elise Keaton feel so real, so grounded, and so genuinely in love. Stephen and Elise aren't flashy sitcom parents. They're not dropping giant catchphrases or doing broad slapstick. Instead, they anchor the show with quiet, believable warmth. Whenever the scripts lean into politics, generational clashes, or big moral questions, it's their calm, thoughtful presence that keeps everything from turning into a cartoon debate. Stephen's sincerity is the secret weapon. When he sits down for those heartfelt dad talks, it's never just about scolding Alex. He's trying to understand him, even when he disagrees with everything Alex stands for. That nuance gives the show a depth you don't always get in 80s family sitcoms. Elise, meanwhile, is the glue. As an architect, a mom, and a leftover flower child, she's juggling the house, her career, and kids who don't share her worldview. She isn't loud, but she's firm. Some of the best emotional beats come from her stepping in, not to shout, but to steer. Without the Keatons, Family Ties becomes the Alex Show. With them, it becomes a family portrait. Messy, funny, political, and surprisingly touching. And speaking of parents who bring heart and humor in equal measure, our next couple turned a basic suburban premise into something much more memorable. 9. Jason and Maggie Seaver, Growing Pains. Growing Pains might have sold itself on the mischievous charm of Mike Seaver and the trials of growing up in the suburbs, but the whole operation quietly depends on Jason and Maggie Seaver. They're not just the parents. They're the backbone that makes the show more than a collection of teen shenanigans. Jason Seaver, the psychiatrist who moves his practice into the family home, is almost a cheat code for a sitcom. His job gives him an excuse to talk through problems, not just with patients, but with his own kids. When he sits on the edge of a bed or leans on a doorway to deliver a life lesson, it somehow avoids feeling preachy. He's firm, but he listens. That balance keeps the show from drifting into after-school special territory. Maggie, meanwhile, represents something pretty rare for 80s TV. A mom who openly loves her career and refuses to shrink herself to fit some idealized housewife image. She's ambitious, sharp, and constantly negotiating the push and pull between newsroom deadlines and what's happening at home. When the show dives into stories about work, gender roles, and stress, it's usually riding on Maggie's shoulders. Together, Jason and Maggie give Growing Pains its emotional spine. The kids' storylines, dating, school, troublemaking, played differently because you see how these two react, adjust, and sometimes totally flail as parents. They're not perfect, but they're trying, and that effort makes the show resonate with viewers who weren't kids anymore. And if the Seavers held things together with conversations and compromise, our next parents had to survive exploding science experiments, slapstick neighbors, and one very persistent kid in suspenders. 8. Carl and Harriette Winslow. Family Matters. Family Matters started as a straightforward blue-collar family sitcom. Then Steve Urkel walked through the door, and suddenly we're dealing with jetpacks, cloning machines, and trips to outer space. Through all of that chaos, Carl and Harriette Winslow are the ones keeping the show from flying off the rails completely. Carl Winslow is the classic gruff TV dad, but there's more going on than just yelling Urkel every week. As a Chicago cop and a proud family man, Carl carries a lot of weight: financial, emotional, and moral. When the show tackles serious topics like racism, police work, or neighborhood safety, it almost always runs through Carl's perspective. Those moments hit harder because we've seen him as a lovable, exasperated dad first. Harriet is the anchor. She's tough, quick-witted, and absolutely refuses to let the house descend into total chaos, even when a mad scientist neighbor kid is literally destroying the living room. She doesn't just parent her own kids, she parents Carl and Steve too. Her tough love advice and ability to cut through the nonsense are what keep the family dynamics believable, even when the science fiction ramps up. Together, Carl and Harriet give Family Matters a sense of home. You can have Urkel turning into a suave alter ego or shrinking himself down with some bizarre invention, but it still feels like a family show because the Winslows treat him like, well, family. If the Winslows manage to stay grounded with a walking disaster in suspenders next door, our next dad had to lead a whole house full of grief, goofy housemates, and 3 daughters who always needed the talk. 7. Danny Tanner, Full House. At first glance, Full House looks like a show built entirely on cute kids and silly uncles. You've got Michelle's catchphrases, Stephanie's comebacks, DJ's teenage drama, and the Joey and Jesse comedy duo. But the emotional center of the series belongs to one person, Danny Tanner. Danny is a widowed dad trying to raise 3 daughters while hosting a morning show and cohabiting with his best friend and brother-in-law. That setup could have easily turned into pure gimmick. Instead, Danny's genuine vulnerability and relentless attempts to do the right thing give the show real heart. Yes, he's the neat freak. We get plenty of jokes about cleaning supplies, spotless rooms, and his obsession with organization. But underneath that quirk is a guy still processing grief and clinging to structure because it's one of the only things he can control. When he sits down at the end of an episode, often on the edge of a bed with soft music playing, it's not just a cliche. He's trying to help his daughters navigate life without their mom. Danny also grounds the antics of Jesse and Joey. When they go too far with some scheme, Danny is the one who reminds them, and us, that there are real kids in this house who need stability. His lectures might be corny, but they're sincere, and that sincerity is why Full House became comfort viewing for so many people. While Danny kept things squeaky clean in San Francisco, our next set of parents ruled their household with sharp one-liners, burned casseroles, and the constant threat of a boot. 6. Red and Kitty Forman, That 70s Show. That 70s Show is technically about the teenagers in the basement, their relationships, their boredom, and their questionable life choices. But the show's secret weapon lives upstairs, Red and Kitty Forman. Anytime the camera moves from the circle to the kitchen, the energy shifts, and you realize this isn't just a teen sitcom, it's a family story. Red Forman is the grumpy dad to end all grumpy dads. He's a veteran, an old-school disciplinarian, and a man who somehow always has a new way to threaten to put his boot somewhere unpleasant. On the surface, it's just a running gag. But underneath, Red is a guy watching the world change faster than he can keep up. When the rare moments of affection slip out, a proud look at Eric, a quiet word of support, they land because we know how hard it is for him to say anything soft. Kitty is the counterbalance, a whirlwind of nervous laughter, emotional overreactions, and overcooked dinners. She's the kind of mom who wants everyone to be happy, even as she slowly unravels from the stress of it all. Her relationship with Eric and his friends is crucial. She doesn't just tolerate them, she loves them like her own, leading to some of the show's sweetest scenes. Together, Red and Kitty sell the generational clash. We see the 70s not just through the kids' rebellion, but through parents who don't recognize the world anymore. Their marriage, full of bickering, eye-rolling, and genuine love, gives the show a beating heart. And if the Formans yelled from the kitchen, our next couple practically weaponized marital misery into an entire sitcom. 5. Al and Peg Bundy, Married with Children. When Married with Children premiered, it proudly blew up the idea of the perfect TV family. No idealized living room here, just a worn-out couch, a broken TV, and Al and Peg Bundy barely hanging on. On the surface, they're a walking warning label. Look a little closer though, and you realize they're the ones making the whole show work. Al Bundy is the embodiment of dashed dreams. He once scored 4 touchdowns in a single high school game and has been living off that story ever since. Now he's a shoe salesman, stuck in a thankless job, heckled by customers, and ignored by pretty much everyone. His constant complaining and sarcastic monologues could get old fast, but Al sells them with just enough self-awareness and pain that you can't help but feel for him. Peg, on the other hand, is all glamour and zero housework. She doesn't cook, she doesn't clean, and she absolutely doesn't apologize for it. What she does do is spar with Al like it's an Olympic sport. Her laziness and materialism are played for laughs, but she also exposes how absurd the expectation of the perfect housewife really is. Together, Al and Peg are a disaster, and that's the point. They turn every scene into a battleground of insults, schemes, and mutual disappointment, yet they never truly walk away from each other. When the outside world threatens them, they close ranks. That weird, twisted loyalty is the secret heart of the show. While the Bundys tore down the ideal family, our next couple showed what it really looks like to be broke, stressed, and still in it together, night after night at the kitchen table. 4. Dan and Roseanne Conner. Roseanne set itself apart by focusing on a working-class family that actually felt working class. No sprawling living room, no perfect hair, no magically solved problems. At the center of that realism are Dan and Roseanne Conner, a couple who argue, tease, and struggle, but never stop feeling like a real married pair you might actually know. Roseanne is loud, sarcastic, and sharp as a tack. She uses humor as a weapon and a shield, taking aim at her kids, her job, and the endless stream of bills. Dan is more laid back, a big teddy bear who'd rather keep the peace than start a fight. Together, they form this perfectly imperfect partnership built on years of history and shared exhaustion. The show leans heavily on their chemistry. When money is tight, when jobs fall through, when the kids are in real trouble, the emotional weight lands on Dan and Roseanne. Watching them sit at the kitchen table, talking about overdue notices or their kids' futures, feels less like a scene and more like eavesdropping. They're also the filter through which we see the Connor kids. Their reactions, whether it's tough love, sarcasm, or genuine fear, tell us how serious a situation really is. When they clash over how to handle Becky, Darlene, or DJ, it's not just about the kids. It's about what kind of parents they want to be, given the limitations they're living under. Dan and Roseanne turn the show into a story about survival, not just punchlines. And while the Connors went to war with overdue bills, our next pair was constantly battling an army of their own children, and occasionally their own sanity. 3. Lois and Hal, Malcolm in the Middle. Malcolm in the Middle is supposedly about a gifted kid trying to make sense of a chaotic home. But let's be honest, Lois and Hal steal the show every time they're on screen. Their parenting style is less gentle guidance and more bare-knuckle brawl with reality, and that's exactly why they're unforgettable. Lois is a force of nature. She's strict, loud, and absolutely unwilling to be manipulated by her kids, no matter how creative their schemes get. On the surface, she's the mean mom. But as the series goes on, you realize she's also the only thing standing between her family and total collapse. She's memorized every trick the boys have and stays one step ahead of them, even while the world keeps piling more on her shoulders. Hal is chaos in dad form. He's anxious, easily distracted, and constantly diving headfirst into bizarre hobbies and side quests. Whether he's obsessing over a new pastime, panicking about some minor crisis, or trying desperately to avoid Lois's wrath, Hal turns every scene into a comedy showcase. Yet when the chips are down, he's deeply devoted to Lois, to the boys, and to the idea that they're all in this together. What really makes them carry the show is how they function as a team. They may yell, bicker, and blame each other, but they're united in one mission: survive raising these kids. Through their eyes, we see a family that is deeply dysfunctional and deeply bonded. If Lois and Hal ruled their house with a mix of terror and love, our next parents managed to balance tough discipline, old school values, and life in a Bel-Air mansion. 2. Uncle Phil and Aunt Vivian, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Will Smith might be the star of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but the show's soul belongs to Philip and Vivian Banks. On paper, they're the strict aunt and uncle trying to keep their wayward nephew in line. In practice, they're the ones who give the show its emotional depth and cultural weight. Uncle Phil is a powerhouse. He's a successful judge, a stern father, and a man who doesn't have time for nonsense. At first, he seems like the stuffy authority figure Will is destined to clash with. But as the show goes on, we see the layers: his working-class roots, his struggles to give his family what he never had, and the genuine love he develops for Will. When he steps in as a father figure, especially in those iconic emotional scenes, it hits hard because we know he's earned that role. Aunt Vivian, in her original incarnation, is just as crucial. She's intelligent, passionate, and fiercely independent. She's a professor, an artist, and a mother who expects excellence from her kids without forgetting where she came from. She challenges Will, defends him when necessary, and refuses to let anyone in the house coast on privilege alone. Together, Phil and Viv embody the show's big themes: race, class, success, identity. They anchor the wild comedy and fish-out-of-water hijinks with serious conversations about who you are and where you come from. Without them, it's just a goofy cousin crashing a rich family's house. With them, it's a story about belonging and transformation. And if Uncle Phil and Aunt Viv gave us some of the most powerful moments in 90s TV, our final parents didn't even need to be regulars to completely hijack every episode they appeared in. 1. Frank and Estelle Costanza. Seinfeld. They're not main characters. They don't show up in every episode. And yet, Frank and Estelle Costanza loom over Seinfeld like a screaming, chaotic storm cloud. Every time George's parents appear, they not only steal the scene, they explain exactly why George is the way he is. Frank Costanza is a force of nature. He's loud, stubborn, and catastrophically confident in his terrible ideas. From creating Festivus to yelling "Serenity now" at the top of his lungs, Frank turns every room into a battlefield. He's the anti-TV dad. No wisdom, no patience. Just unfiltered emotion and bizarre obsessions. Estelle is the perfect match. She's perpetually outraged, endlessly disappointed, and always on the verge of a meltdown. Whether she's screaming George's name, questioning his life choices, or arguing with Frank about absolutely everything, Estelle brings an energy that feels like a parody of every overbearing TV mom that came before her. Together, they create one of the most dysfunctional households in sitcom history. Their constant yelling, petty fights, and impossible standards give George a tragicomic backstory that makes all his neuroses make sense. You don't just laugh at George, you start to understand him. That's how much power his parents have, even from the sidelines. Frank and Estelle also sneak in some of the show's most iconic bits. Festivus, the feats of strength. The flashbacks, the endless grievances. They're living proof that you don't have to be series regulars to carry a show's mythology on your back. From the Keatons' quiet talks to the Costanza's all-out screaming matches, one thing is clear. On TV, parents matter a lot more than we realized. Conclusion: the unsung heroes of sitcom land. Looking back at these shows, it's easy to remember the kids, the catchphrases, and the wild plots. But when you strip all that away, what really holds everything together is the parents. The Keatons debating politics around the dinner table. The Seavers balancing careers and kids. The Winslows and Connors facing money problems and real-world issues. The Bundys turning misery into comedy. The Bankses navigating race and class in Bel-Air. The Costanzas turning family life into a full-contact sport. These moms and dads gave their shows weight. They grounded the jokes in something that felt familiar. Whether that familiarity was comforting, chaotic, or a little bit terrifying, they made the lessons land, the emotions linger, and the reruns worth watching again and again. So the next time you're binging an old favorite, pay attention to the parents. Watch how they listen, how they react, how they quietly drive the story forward. You might realize that the supporting cast was actually carrying the whole thing on their shoulders the entire time. Now it's your turn. Which TV parents do you think secretly carried their show? Did we miss a dad who deserves justice? A mom who never got enough credit? Drop your picks in the comments. We're always on the lookout for ideas for a part 2. And if you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, so you don't miss our next deep dive into classic TV. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.